Okay, so for this last part, we do have some time for Q&A. And so if anybody has any questions, I'll have a floating microphone.
So, not exactly central to the topic that you're talking, but you mentioned it, so I wanted to, and it sort of conforms with my experience. You said something about vitaka and vichara, and you said that vitaka is more about mindfulness and vichara more about awareness. And that sort of integrates with my experience, and so I wanted to hear more about that. I find, for example, that like if I'm walking and I'm choosing as my object vitaka, the foot planting, there comes a point where I kind of am letting that go and I'm just sort of in awareness. But the walking is the primary thing that grabs my awareness because it's the most prominent feature of what I'm doing at the moment. So if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, that's very good. Vitaka Vichara and Sati Sampajanya. So I was linking those together because, and the reason being is because the word sati, mindfulness, usually it's fairly vague what it means, and it's good to get our minds around what the meaning of it is. And it doesn't just exist by itself, it's always with sampajanya. If you just have sati by itself, it's like recollection. It's actually using your memory or using your recollection to remind yourself. So it's said that it's coupled with right effort because you have to actually remind yourself to be aware or become aware in the moment. So that's like vitaka. Vitaka is like applied thought. So you could say sati is a type of vitaka. So it's like that's just the reminder, like remember to be aware, telling yourself that. And then sampajanya is the awareness itself that then as it gets sustained, that's more like vichara, like sustained awareness, sustained thought. So applied and sustained thought and sati sampajanya, these could be seen to be very similar. So sati is like we say establishing mindfulness. So we're establishing, when we have sati, that's like an establishing. And then what are we establishing? We're establishing sampajanya. We're establishing awareness. So you could think of sometimes vitaka vichara is described as bringing up your meditation object and then keeping the attention on it. But then sati sampajanya is remembering to be aware, and then sampajanya is the awareness itself. There's also sati panya, that's mindfulness and discernment. So that would be sampajanya has the word anya in it, and panya also has the word anya in it. So the Buddha has all these anya words. They're all around knowing and awareness. But sometimes there's more discriminating or discerning knowing, and sometimes there's more intuitive or just all-encompassing knowing. Sampajanya, sometimes it's helpful to look at Thai translations as well. So right mindfulness in Thai is kwam riluk chop, which is right recollection. You're remembering something, you're recollecting something. Riluk. So then sampajanya in Thai is usually kwam ru rab, which is like all around, all-encompassing knowing.
Ajahn, in the framework of brightness, uprightness, and malleability, could you speak more on cultivation of malleability?
Again, coming to the Thai, the malleability is, I think, if I can remember, la lam, it's like the ability to pour into a casting, and that's they use for malleability, like the ability to. It's like casting a Buddha image, you like cast it into a particular framework. So there's both a way to cultivate it, and it's not really, it's kind of like the same idea as like, how do you let go? Like you can't let go by an act of will. You can't let go by just telling yourself to let go. You can only let go through wisdom. So malleability is similar. It can't really happen. You can't just tell yourself to be more malleable, but it happens through wisdom, through discernment, and through experience, through practice. So over time, as we practice, then the Dhamma will naturally arise quicker, the mind will naturally be more malleable. But then this is described as it only comes about. It's not that we can just, in any quick way, make ourselves more malleable, but it's that comes about through Sila Samadhi Panya, comes about through the training and the practice over a long period of time. And then we'll start to see that we will be able to, the more we see impermanence, the more we see the nature of reality based on reflecting on the Buddha's teachings all the time, then it's only natural that we will be able to be more malleable. Or we could say that our character or our nature would become more gentle, like we wouldn't. This is also connected with like the ego kind of stepping aside, because the ego or the sense of self is something that's rigid, that's not malleable. So as, say, you could say like an unwholesome sense of self-importance that almost everybody has, like so malleability would be connected with humbleness and humility as well. Like sometimes if we get criticized, say somebody criticizes us for something, and we might have that sudden like, who do they think they are? So that's like the lack of malleability. But it's like if we're able to take something unpleasant, contact something unpleasant like a criticism, whether it's true or not, it'll still sting, it'll still be painful. And actually, it's like the ability to work around it and do almost like spiritual qigong rather than just stand like rigidly and let things hit us, which is going to be more painful. So so a lack of malleability would be like standing rigidly, saying, I'm strong, I'm firm, I'm going to stand my ground. And then all the arrows hit us and we're just experiencing more pain and misery. Or you could almost think like the Matrix, like kind of dodging all the bullets and kind of they're flying over us. And that ability to step aside, that ability for the ego to step aside would be more like the malleability. But that doesn't come about through just wanting it to come about. It doesn't come about through it's similar to like the three fetters that would fall away at stream entry that we talk about. Sakaya Ditti, Vicikiccha, Silabbata Paramasa. Sakaya Ditti meaning taking ourselves to be self. Silabbata Paramasa, attachment to rites and rituals. Vicikiccha, doubt, vacillation, wavering. Those three things don't fall away through focusing on getting rid of those three things. Those three things fall away as a result of insight into impermanence. It's not that we try to get rid of each of those three things. It's not that we focus on those three things. We look into the nature of reality, into the nature of impermanence and uncertainty, and through an insight into that, the result is those three things fall away. The result of the initial insight into the Four Noble Truths is that those three things fall away. But they don't fall away through, I have to work on my Sakaya Ditti, I have to work on my doubt, I have to work on my attachment to rites and rituals. The Buddha's talking about those three fetters falling away because that's the result. It's like you have those things, and then through the practice, those things fall away through insight, but they don't fall away through focusing directly on them. So similarly, the mind and the heart doesn't necessarily become more malleable and adaptable through focusing on trying to make myself more malleable and adaptable, but it becomes more malleable and adaptable through the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path and through starting to gain some insight into impermanence and the nature of reality. So through doing all these practices, through the cultivation of virtue, meditation, discernment, then this quality of humbleness, humility, also through cultivation of what we can do in the moment is we can focus on cultivating patient endurance. That's the Kanti. We can focus on Kanti Parami, the Otton in Thai. We can focus on that. That's something we can focus on. And that will start to make us move in that direction of being more adaptable and malleable. So then, and when the Buddha talks about when the mind is primed, malleable, fit for work, that's through that state of mind is coming about through the practice, but he doesn't say you're consciously making it malleable, you're consciously priming the mind, but you're doing all the practices that the Buddha recommends, and then that's the result. That's kind of how it works.
Thank you for that reflection. It's brought some things up to ask you about. One of the things that I've started noticing with the last few days of kind of adjusting to being here and practicing is the heart has started to kind of sensitize. And one of the ways that I kind of navigated my life outside of the monastery, just noticing, is developing this resilience through the kind of heart not being as affected from some of the challenging things that can arise just with certain people that aren't practicing right speech and right effort. So just kind of reflecting now, trying to not fixate on it, but wisely kind of posture myself for going back into life and knowing that that sensitivity is going to be there, but maybe some advice on not getting too overwhelmed and kind of being able to move through the winds of that as they arise.
So more after you leave the monastery and practicing in daily life?
Yeah, with the heart being more open and sensitive, and realizing that a lot of my ability to be more resilient was not being as sensitive.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes you can't be completely open. So sometimes in certain situations, you won't be able to be completely open. You might not want to be too sensitive or too heart open in around certain people or in certain situations. And it is a blessing to be in the monastery where you're around trustworthy people and you can just be more open and let down your guard a bit, and people aren't going to be coming at you. It's unfortunate that in the world people can be very brutal with each other, even just friends or family members. That I remember a teaching that Ajahn Amaro used to give was, which I really liked at the time, which was, don't be so hard on yourself. Act as if you're your own best friend. But then later on, I thought, no, don't, because that's where all the trouble happens. That's where the hurt happens. Is good friends not agreeing with each other, family members not agreeing with each other. That's what's the most painful. That's what ends up being the most hard to bear and endure. If it was just people you didn't know or don't know that well, there's not that history there. That there's not going to be as much. It's not going to be as painful, say, if a stranger was to come up and criticize you, as if, say, like somebody you trust or somebody you respect comes and criticizes you. That's going to be much more difficult. Or if a friend ends up saying something about you behind your back that's hurtful, then that's going to be much more difficult to deal with than, say, somebody you don't know very well saying something critical behind your back. That's not going to be such a big deal if that was to happen. And we can develop compassion. We can think about people. Most people are not practicing. Most people are not trying to be reflective. So most people are not reflective and not even trying to be reflective, and not even seeing being reflective as a virtue. So it's just normal to speak your mind, tell somebody off. That's what should be done. That's what, and depends on the culture. Every culture is going to be different. But in general, so when somebody who's being reflective and open and practicing and trying to train themselves, trying to train their mind and trying to make their mind, actions of body, speech, and mind more wholesome, and then we end up meeting up with people who aren't practicing. We're just out and about, and we meet up with people who perhaps aren't practicing. And so sometimes we can develop the mistaken assumption that, oh yeah, I'm doing this, therefore other people are probably doing it as well. But actually that's not the case. So then it can be very painful if we're in a very sensitive, open state and having compassion for everybody, and then somebody in our heart open state comes and puts a knife in it. That can be quite painful, quite difficult. So unfortunately, sometimes we do need to have our guard up and not be totally open, and just be able to put our head down, do our own thing, not necessarily have to get involved with too many people unless they're unless say they're trustworthy. So yeah, this happens. This can happen out in the world. There's no like way really, I guess I don't really have any techniques for how to close yourself off more, but because we're always talking about being open and aware and mindful. But yeah, I guess you can the way we use our awareness is important as well. So if somebody is harsh with us, and we can reflect, yeah, this person isn't practicing. They probably don't. They might not even have the intention to be that hurtful or harmful, but I'm taking it that way because I'm more open and sensitive. That person might not even be aware. They're just, because that's what the untrained mind does. It can just spurt out or lash out in some way. And if we're not aware of ourselves, it can be, yeah, just not even knowing that we're doing that or the effect that it might have on others. So for us, we're actually cultivating our actions and trying to see what effect they have on others, and trying to live harmoniously and living with precepts, just taking something like honesty. And not everyone will see that as a virtue. So yeah, if I lie about this, I can just get what I want in the moment. And so and getting what I want is what's important. So we're rising above that and with honesty. So we might then be very disappointed in others if we see them being dishonest. But we shouldn't be too disappointed, because that's just the way it has always been, always will be. There'll just be people who aren't practicing, who are dishonest, or people who are deciding to not be self-reflective, and they won't be able to see the results of their own actions. So we can try, it's important to try to not get into pity. It's better to go toward a sense of compassion, thinking, well, that type of action is coming from suffering. So we can reflect in that way, and then we can give rise to compassion, but trying to not go into pity, which would be unwholesome. Like, oh, I feel so sorry for that person, but more that, oh, may they be free of that suffering at some point. Yeah, maybe based on how I'm And for people whose practice is more mature, then you have like the Buddha with Angulimala coming and trying to kill the Buddha, and the Buddha actually completely converting him through his spiritual power. So ultimately, that type of thing is possible. Or you have stories of like Liberia. There was a African general who was a very, very horrible person, very cruel, horrible person, and he killed many, many people in a civil war. And then there was a group of 300 women who decided to do a peace protest. And this man was a general, and he was about to destroy this entire village that had thousands of people in it. And they were just going to destroy the whole place and kill everybody. And this group of 300 women formed a line and started singing childhood songs. And he knew some of these songs were songs that he had heard as a child, that like lullabies that he had heard as a child that his own mother had sung to him. And this is someone who he was a personal guard for a former president in that region, and was then leading one of the generals, one of the leaders in this civil war after this particular president was assassinated by the other side. And these childhood songs and these childhood memories triggered something in him, and he ordered his troops back. And then he became the leader of one of the biggest peace movements in the country. And so it's very, very powerful. And somebody he started doing 3-month Thich Nhat Hanh retreats. And then through his meditation, he transformed all of his anger and all of his PTSD. He had really serious PTSD. And through that, then was able to become a really very powerful force for good. To the point that he then, because his whole thing was to get revenge against this one guy who had killed his whole family. So this one guy one of the leaders of the other side of this fight had gone in and savagely, brutally murdered this particular guy's entire family. And so his whole battle was to get back at this guy and find him. And when the other guy heard that this one man, this general, wanted to meet up with him in order to forgive him for killing his family. The guy thought it was a lie. He thought it was a ruse to lure him in to get him. So he fled the country. And then over time, it became clear that this man was actually very sincere. And then they did meet up and they hugged, and the guy forgave him. And then the other guy said, I was under orders. It wasn't my intention. And like the whole story came out. And so it's very, very moving, very powerful. It shows that that's a very extreme example, but that kind of thing can happen if you're able to make an example of your practice in the world. And then the end of the story, and this is very recent, this is like the last 10 years that this all happened. So maybe 10 to 15 years, yeah. And then more recent, the end of the story that, as far as I've heard it so far, is in 2022, this man who was the fearsome general, he had some sort of medical emergency and needed emergency medical care. And then he was rushed to a hospital, and then the man who saved his life was the one he asked forgiveness from. So it ended up that he was a doctor, and he actually can't remember what it was exactly, that he saved his life, a blood transfusion or something. And because it's like this is a reflection on karma, because it was so powerful, such powerful good karma, that this general went and asked forgiveness from his archenemy. The result ended up coming around that this man actually ended up saving his life later on. So yeah, just the power. Sometimes we can make a display just through the power of our goodness. It can have an effect on people. So if somebody is harsh with us or criticizes us, or somebody who isn't practicing, who isn't reflective, maybe makes some very hurtful comment to us, the way we react can cause faith to arise for that person, and they might become more reflective. They might want to start practicing based on our behavior. And also, we can reflect that at one point we weren't practicing. Also, we may have, this is our karma playing out as well, that how many times did we act without being reflective? And that story is in that book that Beth is starting to read. You know.
So my question is, how much of adaptability do you think comes with preparation and then reactions in the moment? So the question arises from when you were talking about the presidential election, like don't want to talk about it, but my idea is like, oh, I can just desensitize and just not think about it at all. So if whenever the result does come up, I'm like, oh, whatever, I didn't really care anyways. But the other way could be like getting all this information about like who I'd prefer to win. And then whatever happens, then I'm like, okay, that wasn't what I wanted, but I can figure out how to deal with it now. So like I find that like in life, there's always that like I have little preferences here and there, and if it doesn't go my way, then it's all about adapting to whatever did arise. Or I can just have no preferences, so then when it does happen, it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question, because it is good to talk about this aspect of it a bit, that being adaptable or having no issues, no problems, doesn't mean we don't care, or doesn't mean we don't gather information, or it doesn't mean that there's wholesome and unwholesome. And so, but what it does mean is that the adaptability comes through the insight into impermanence and uncertainty, so that even if things do kind of seemingly go the way we think is good or the way we want them, it's still uncertain how it's going to play out. So reflecting on uncertainty can help us to let go and to see that, well, this is just based on all sorts of karmas that are beyond any one person's understanding. So, something like the election, everybody's thinking about it, everybody's going to have their take on it. But as practitioners, we should be able to look at it in a way of, one is uncertainty, two is that this is illustrating the drawbacks of samsara. And one of the main drawbacks of samsara is that everybody will have different viewpoints. Even your best friend who you see eye to eye on so many things, you probably won't see eye to eye on absolutely everything. There'll still be little disagreements here and there, and that's the drawback of samsara. So that seeing things in that way saying that, well, it'll never be totally satisfactory no matter what happens. It'll never be totally satisfactory. And in fact, not only will it not be totally satisfactory, it'll be quite unsatisfactory no matter what happens, because the worldly dhammas, they just have their own momentum. And yeah, we might have pretty sophisticated views about what's going on in the world and about who's got better policies or worse policies or whatever. But then if we reflect on it, rather than like, well, I want this or that person to win, can we see it from an attitude of curiosity and learning in order to develop ourselves further, to be better people? And I think that's a good way to do it. It's a blessing for us who are ordained. It's against our rules to vote, so we don't get involved in that way. And I think that's quite good, because in my own opinion, when you vote, you're actually linking yourself with energies that are beyond the understanding of any one person. It's not to say don't vote, and I'm certainly not going to tell you who to vote for, but it's more like it's something that, yeah, we can't really understand it. It's just too big. It's just too big. There's just too many variables. And not to say we won't have strong feelings about it one way or another, but adaptable means there's also a courageousness that goes along with it. Like, we don't give up. Whether we're disappointed or whether we're satisfied, time's going to keep rolling on, and we have to keep going somehow. We don't want to just give up. Like, I can guarantee that there will be people who commit suicide at this election. Like, that's how strong people feel. And like, because there's just too much invested in it. So we don't want to invest I would say, like, if you're a person who wants to be active in the world, you can invest part of yourself in it, but don't invest your whole self in it, because then if it goes your way, it's going to be, yeah. And then if it doesn't, it's over. So that's kind of adaptability in action, I guess. Yeah. Maybe we can do a little bit more meditation, actually. I misread the clock and ended the meditation a little early, so we can make up for it now.